In 1884, in New Orleans, something strange was happening. People were eating well, too well, but no one asked where the meat came from. Why? Because the truth was worse than hunger. And once you know the truth, you'll wish you were still hungry. In the heart of 19th century Louisiana, where cypress trees lean like old secrets over black swamp water and the air hums with heat, a story was whispered long after the screams stopped. A story not written in church books or town records, but in the marrow of those who lived to taste it. It's about two sisters, polite, graceful, generous, who served kindness by the pound and something else by the slab. Because in 1884, the smoke rising from New Orleans carried more than the scent of seasoned pork and hickory. It carried a curse, a hunger, and the terrible price of turning a blind eye when dinner tastes too good to ask questions. This is the story of Ully and Mabel Thibodeau, the cannibal sisters of Louisiana. Before we descend deeper into the smokehouse of horrors, make sure you're subscribed to Ancestral Fear, where true terror is found not in fiction, but in what people chose to ignore. Hit that bell, because some stories were buried for a reason. Now let's begin. The town of New Orleans was little more than a clearing in the swamp. Just 27 homes, a clapboard church, and a post office that doubled as a barber shop. Most days, the mud was ankle deep, the mosquitoes thick and Notto darkened the light, and the air so dense it felt like breathing through wet cloth. Life was hard, hunting was harder, and when the rains came, which was often, the roads disappeared completely, and people lived off salt, prayer, and meat when they could get it. But there was one place where meat never seemed to run dry. At the edge of town, just past where the trees grew too tight and the fog never lifted, stood the Thibodeau Smokehouse. A slant-roofed building with blackened walls and a chimney that never stopped breathing. It belonged to Ully, the elder sister, sharp-eyed and graceful in her movements, and Mabel, younger, soft-spoken, and always seen with a ribbon in her hair and blood beneath her fingernails. The townspeople loved them. When a family lost their hogs to fever, the sisters would send smoked brisket neatly wrapped in linen. When a flood took down Acabin, they brought stew with dumplings so soft it brought tears. When the winter of '53 killed 24 chickens and all the town's deer vanished into silence, the Thibodeau sisters kept everyone fed. No one asked where it came from. The sisters claimed they had a secret supply line, a trapper cousin up in the north who sent barrels of salted meat. Others said they raised feral hogs in the deep swamp where no one dared go. A few wondered, but not for long, because wondering meant hunger, and the sisters made sure no one went hungry. The smokehouse sat behind their cottage, a long, low structure with iron hinges and thick chains on the doors. It was always locked, except on smoke days when the chimney gushed thick black fog, and the scent spread like a spell over the village. People claimed they could smell peppercorn and garlic in it. But there was always another note, faint and metallic. Most ignored it. Only Father Henry, the newly assigned priest, flinched whenever he passed by. Inside the cottage, the sisters lived like ladies. Fine lace curtains, a piano missing only one key, a parlor with a portrait of their late mother, and an antique grandfather clock that ticked 3 minutes too slow. No men ever visited. No one ever saw livestock, and no one was ever invited to see what they stored behind the shed. But people noticed something else. Strangers came through town. Hunters, tradesmen, drifters, and they'd often visit the Thibodeaus for lodging or trade. The sisters, always kind, would offer them tea, a place to wash, and a warm meal. The strangers never left rude reviews. In fact, they never left at all. A merchant from New Orleans was last seen entering their cottage in April. A trapper from Arkansas was heard boasting about the price he'd get for furs. But his cart was later found floating down the creek, empty. The excuses always came easy. He probably took the river. She ran off with her lover. Men like that don't stay still. The town didn't investigate. After all, meat was on the table. Ully often walked through the village in her pressed skirts and dark gloves, delivering wrapped bundles to widows and mothers. Always smiling, always polite. Mabel stayed closer to the home, tending the smokehouse fires. Her apron stained red even before the slaughter was meant to begin. Children called her the quiet butcher. And in the evenings the smoke would rise again, black as ink, curling like fingers into the twilight, and New Orleans would eat. They always ate. No one knew that beneath the smokehouse floor, behind a second hidden door, lay a trap door lined with hooks and a stone table with rusted restraints and a journal with names written in red chalk, followed by dates and brief notes like tender thighs, slow bleed, or young, clean, little waste. Not yet. At this point in the story, all they knew was that the sisters had a gift for flavor and that their kindness never ran dry. When asked about the recipe, Uli would only smile. "Old family secret," she'd say, and the town would laugh, and they'd chew a little slower, and they'd wipe their mouths, and none of them, not even the priest, would ask where the bones went. Not yet, because hunger has a way of teaching people what to ignore. And gratitude, when fed with warm flesh and quiet comfort, becomes a form of collective denial. But New Orleans would soon learn that the smoke didn't just rise from wood and spice. It rose from sins too tender to burn, and a secret cooked low and slow until someone finally tasted the truth. By midsummer of 1884, the town of New Orleans was thriving in a way no one could explain. While neighboring parishes starved from drought and animal sickness, meat still graced every table in New Orleans, juicy, tender, and always smoked to perfection. People praised the good fortune. They spoke of God's mercy, but few dared admit the obvious. There were no cows, no pigs, no deer. Not anymore. The town's hunters returned empty-handed, their dogs quiet, their traps untouched. Chickens had died off months ago from fever. And yet, the townsfolk still ate ribs, loins, chops, and rich fatty stew served ate very Sunday picnic. All of it, of course, courtesy of the Tobido sisters. Yulie and Mabel seemed almost untouched by the hardship around them. Their skin glowed, their smiles never wavered, and they never asked for payment, only whispered prayers of thanks or perhaps a favor returned someday. People called them saints, angels. Some said their smokehouse was blessed. But Father Enrich, New Orleans's newly posted young priest, was not so sure. He had been sent from Baton Rouge in early spring, tasked with re-establishing order and faith in this forgotten swamp parish. With only 2 years of priesthood behind him and a suitcase full of borrowed robes, he'd arrived optimistic. But the longer he stayed, the more that optimism began to rot into something darker. The town was polite, but it was quiet, too quiet and blind. They didn't ask questions when strangers vanished. They didn't seem to care. Henry first noticed the pattern during a conversation with old man Brossard the wheelwright, who complained that no one from out of town ever brought him business anymore. They come down the trade road, he grumbled, but they don't leave. When Henry asked what he meant, the man only spat tobacco into the mud and muttered, "Ask the smokehouse. They always eat." At first, Henri thought it was just swamp talk, superstition, and resentment. But then he began reviewing his parish registry. In 4 months, he had logged 6 missing travelers, all of whom had been seen stopping at the Tobido's property. A merchant from Opelousers, a fur trapper heading south, a mute boy barely 14 looking for work, a pregnant woman who never made it to her sister's home. Their names were written marked with arrived, but never with departed. Henri's deepened when he noticed something else. The sisters never purchased livestock. Not once had they bought a chicken, goat, or cut of meat from the local market. Not one local farmer had sold to them in months. And yet, their smokehouse chimney still puffed away day after day, hour after hour. One Sunday afternoon, Henry stood behind the church's wide oak doors and watched as Mabel walked across the square in her blood-spotted apron, holding a wicker basket of smoked ribs. She placed it on the table at the community gathering, smiled, and walked away. Children ran, women clapped, men licked their fingers. Not a soul questioned its origin. Henry sat alone on the church steps that night, trying to put it all into words. The suspicion, the fear, the strangeness of it all. The town was being fed, yes, but it wasn't a blessing. It was a bribe. And something told him that the price had already been paid. Later that week, a trader named Elijah Cole passed through town. He was rough, weathered, and sharpied, the kind of man who didn't scare easily. Unruh warned him quietly not to accept lodging with the Tobido sisters. "Don't eat their food," he said. "Just pass through." Elijah laughed. "Preacher, I've been through darker hollows than this. 2 sweet women feeding the poor. I'll take my chances." He was seen entering the Tobido cottage around dusk. By morning, his horse was still tied to the post, his cart still loaded. But Elijah Cole was nowhere to be found. When Henry asked around, the townsfolk shrugged. "Probably headed out early," someone said. Probably caught the east road, said another. But Unra had checked the east road himself. No tracks, no cart, no signs. And that night, the smokehouse chimney belched its usual black stream, thicker than ever. Henry couldn't sleep. He opened the windows of the rectory and gagged at the smell. It was strong, almost sweet, like roasted ham soaked in something coppery. He lit a candle, crossed himself, and whispered prayers for the soul of Elijah Cole. The next day, as if nothing had happened, Yulie herself appeared at the church carrying a tray of honeyed meat slices wrapped in parchment. For the congregation, she said with a gentle smile. We like to share. Henry stared at her, trying to find a crack in her expression, a slip in her voice, a flicker of darkness in her eyes. But she stood there elegant as ever, her hair pinned back in silver combs, her skin pale and clean. There was nothing monstrous about her, nothing to accuse, so he accepted the tray, and he did not serve it. Instead, that night, he buried it beneath the church garden, hands trembling. Something was very, very wrong in New Orleans, and Father Enrino understood the town didn't want the truth. The meat was too good, the sisters were too generous, and the hunger had become too familiar. The next step, he knew, would require more than prayer. It would require proof. Proof he hoped he'd never find. But soon, a child would go missing, and all doubts would be devoured. There's a reason children are told to stay away from the woods. Not because the trees are dangerous, but because they listen, they see, and they never forget what you show them. Jacqueline Rowe was only 10 years old, wiry and curious with eyes too big for his head and a habit of sneaking off when no one was watching. His father, a trapper and part-time carpenter, kept him on a tight leash. But children born in Cypress Hollow always find ways to slip through cracks, especially when the fog is thick and the adults are distracted with their own lives. The Tobido sisters' property fascinated Jack. Every time they brought food to the village, every time smoke curled into the sky, he wondered how they made it. He'd never seen them buy animals, never saw a single pig, goat, or chicken on their land. And yet, there was always meat. Always. So, one afternoon, while his father slept off a bottle of swamp wine, and the village took its Sunday rest, Jack followed a gap between two cypress trees and crept toward the back of the Tobido cottage. Quiet as a breath low to the ground. The smokehouse loomed in front of him, wood blackened with age, its hinges thick with rust. It looked less like a building and more like a wound in the earth. A place built not for food, but for forgetting what you put inside. Jack crouched low and peered through a thin seam in the warped boards. Just enough space to see inside when the wind lifted the smoke. What he saw was not an animal. It was a man bare-chested, hanging upside down from a hook. His back was carved open in neat surgical lines, and steam rose from his skin as if he had only just been killed. A bucket beneath him filled slowly with something thick and dark. The room was silent, save for the soft hiss off that hitting coals. Jack stumbled backward, choking on a scream that never came. He turned, sprinted home, and burst into his father's arms, babbling nonsense about bodies, smoke, and blood. His father, still half drunk, cuffed him on the ear. You've been spying on those ladies. You'll get whipped, boy. Ain't no one likes a liar. But Jack kept insisting. All evening, he spoke of what he saw. The figure, the hook, the bucket. By dawn, he was gone. His bed was empty, his shoes still by the door, the front latch untouched. No one had heard a sound in the night. The town whispered that he ran away, frightened by his father's temper. Some said he must have gotten lost in the swamp. Others claimed he'd gone looking for adventure. Only one man, Father Henry, believed otherwise. Emre's hands trembled as he pored over his registry again that morning. Another name, another disappearance. He visited Jack's home, consoled the grieving father, and then asked the question no one else dared. Did he say where he saw the body? The father hesitated, then nodded. He said it was behind the smokehouse. I told him he was seeing things, but now Henry didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The smokehouse chimney was already exhaling again, thick, black, and almost smug. That night, Father Henry couldn't sleep. He walked the church aisles barefoot, praying under his breath. The fog outside pressed against the stained glass windows like ghosts too patient to knock. He knew he had to act, and soon, the next morning, Henry walked through the village, watching as the Tobido sisters handed out their usual parcels of meat. Uli wore her pale green gloves. Mabel hummed a tune, the same lullaby she always sang, soft and slow like boiling syrup. They smiled, laughed, thanked the town for its kindness. Unr approached them. "May I speak with you?" he asked, forcing calm. Uli turned to him with a warm expression. "Of course, father." "About the boy," he said. "Zach, he's gone. He said he saw something behind your home." There was a flicker, a tiny shift in Uli's expression. Not fear, not guilt, just calculation. "He was a troubled child," she replied. "We've always tried to be kind to the little ones, but some just lose their way." "Did he come to your property?" "No more than any other child," she said smoothly. "You know how they are, always inventing stories." Henry looked at Mabel, who stood still, ice on the ground. She did not speak. She never did. When Uli handled questions, he left them with a nod, but something had shifted. The sisters knew he suspected, and he knew they were watching him now. 2 days later, Jack's satchel was found caught in the reeds behind the smokehouse. It was half buried in mud. Inside a slingshot, a toy soldier carved from pine, and a strip-off blood-stained linen. The town sheriff, old and weary, dismissed it. "Could have been anyone's," he muttered. "Boys leave things behind." But Henry said nothing, that he simply walked home and stared at the candle burning on his windowsill, whispering prayers for a boy whose only mistake was looking too closely at what others chose to ignore. And still the smoke rose. Still, the town ate. Still, no one asked why the sisters never wept when children vanished. Because once you taste something too rich to forget, you'll do anything to keep your appetite from remembering what it cost. No one saw Father Henry on the morning he chose to break into the Tobito house. The air was thick with swamp heat, the kind that clings to your neck like a whisper. New Orleans moved slowly that day, dulled by sun and silence, and the sisters had gone to the market early, their baskets swinging, their smiles bright. Henry had been watching, waiting, and now, with the house empty, he crossed the churchyard, past the hollowed oak, and stepped lightly into the backwoods. The sisters' cottage stood like a memory, clean, whitewashed, delicate. No one had ever thought to see it as anything but warm. But now, with the curtains drawn and the door locked, it looked like something else, a trap set in lace. He circled the property once, then jimted the back door open with the blade of his crucifix. The wood groaned, his breath caught. No alarms, no creaks. Inside, the house was silent as a graveyard. The parlor smelled faintly of lavender and smoked meat. Everything was arranged perfectly. Dried herbs tied in bundles, lace doilies without a speck of dust, and on the mantel, a painting of 2 young girls in white standing by a river. Henry didn't know what he was looking for, only that he had to find something. Proof, something he could bring to the people, something they couldn't ignore. He searched for nearly an hour. The kitchen, the bedrooms, even the pantry. Nothing. No hidden doors. No trap doors in the smokehouse. No bones in the chimney. It wasn't until he noticed a loose board beneath the rocking chair in Mabel's bedroom that his hands began to tremble. The floor had a gap, tiny, deliberate. He wedged his crucifix beneath it and pried it up. And there, in the dark cavity beneath the floor, sat a single object. A leather-bound journal, weathered and slick with sweat. He opened it. The first page was written in beautiful, careful handwriting. "Thesis not for God to read. This is not for guilt. This is only for remembering." Unreturned the page. Then another. His throat tightened. Each page listed a name, a date, and a note. Amos Talbert, April 1847. Bitter, too old, kept screaming. Hilda Ross, July 1849. Fat content ideal. Slight illness before, but didn't matter. Josiah Pine, May 1850. Strong flavor, took longer to soften. Worth it. Baby G, January 1851, would not stop crying. Waste of brine. The ink smudged in places, but the entries were clear. Every one of them was a person, someone real, someone gone. And on the final page, the ink still fresh, barely dried. Jack-O' Row, September 1884. Curious, too lean, but sweet and quiet, didn't struggle much. Unra slammed the book shut. He could barely breathe. The air in the room felt colder. He wanted to vomit, scream, pray all at once. But instead, he tucked the journal under his coat, replaced the floorboard, and left the house exactly as he found it. Back in the rectory, he locked the doors, lit every candle he owned, and sat trembling before the altar. He didn't know what horrified him more, that the sisters had done these things, or that they had done them so calmly, so beautifully, like artists keeping notes on their craft. The next morning, he walked to the home of Reverend Arner, the aging pastor emeritus, who'd served New Orleans before him. Arner opened the door in a dusty robe, blinking like a man unused to visitors, and read him the journal. The old man read for a long time, page after page, then stopped when he saw the entry for Tobias Arner, November 1838. Henry saw the color drain from his face. "That was my nephew," Arner whispered. "We thought he drowned." "He didn't," Henry said. There was nothing left to say. Word spread fast, but not loud. Whispers began in the market. Murmurs set the well. Women held their children tighter. Men glanced at the smokehouse chimney with an ease, but no one confronted the sisters. Not yet. That evening, Yulie and Mabel returned home to find their floorboard nailed unevenly. They said nothing. But the next morning, Father Henry found a fresh parcel of smoked meat waiting at his church door, wrapped in wax paper and tied with a red ribbon. No note, just one small bone white button resting on top. It was identical to the one Jack had worn on his shirt. Henry didn't touch it, didn't open the paper. He burned the entire package in the church garden, the smell rising with the night fog. The next day, the smokehouse chimney was darker than ever. And this time, even the townsfolk started to look up. Harvest came late that year in New Orleans. The fields yielded little. The fish barely bit, and the game disappeared into the deeper woods. The swamp air was heavier than usual, sticky, bloated, and thick with the scent of rot and decay. And yet, the Tobias sisters prepared a feast. They always did. Every year, on the last Sunday before the flood rains returned, the parish gathered behind the church under lanterns and patchwork canopies. Families brought what they could, a jug of molasses, some hard biscuits, an old fiddle. But the main dish always came from Ulie and Mabel. This time it was stew, a dark, thick, fragrant meat stew with sweet onions and golden potatoes simmering in black iron pots ladled with care by Mabel, whose pale lips curled faintly each time she offered a bowl. And this time, Father Henry refused to eat. He stood beneath the old oak tree, watching how the townspeople devoured it. How they laughed, how they hummed, how they licked their fingers and leaned back in their chairs with satisfied sighs. They never asked where I came from. He thought of the journal hidden in his rectory, now wrapped in cloth and locked inside a wine crate. Head hot of the little bones in the garden fire. He thought of the button and the parcel in Jack's satchel. The truth was laid bare, but truth meant nothing without witnesses willing to look. Then it happened. A woman shrieked, not in terror, but confusion. She had bitten into something hard, something buried in her stew. She spit it into her palm. A button, small, bone-white, chipped around the edges, identical to the one Father Henry had burned with a parcel. A beggar had been wearing a coat with those buttons. Old Silas, who'd wandered into town weeks ago and never been seen again. He'd begged near the chapel steps. Henry had given him bread. Others had scowled. Now only his buttons remained. Henry stepped forward. His voice rang clear and low. "This is not beef," he said. The music stopped. Some froze. Others blinked slowly, confused. "This stew," Henry said, "isn't from any cow or pig or deer. It's from someone who walked among us, someone we failed." The Tobias sisters remained still by their cauldron. Ulie smiled. "Father," she said sweetly, "perhaps the heat's gotten to you. You haven't eaten all day. Sit down, won't you?" "I've seen your ledger," he replied. "I've read the names." Now the people turned, faces darkened, but not with rage, with disbelief. Mothers held children tighter. Men shifted uncomfortably, and yet no one stood beside him. "You'll accuse two women who fed this town through famine, of murder," said Mayor Roulant, rising from his table. His voice was calm but sharp. "On the basis of a button," Henry looked around. "On the basis of a dozen names, a boy gone missing, and flesh that tastes nothing like any animal I've ever known. You refuse to bless the food," another man added. "You've been off ever since Jack ran off. Maybe it's you who's unwell." Yulie placed her ladle down. "We are women of hospitality," she said. "We've never turned away a mouth. Even when others had nothing to give, we gave. And now this." Tears welled in her eyes. Whether real or rehearsed, no one could tell. Mabel lowered her gaze and wrung her hands like a child scolded. The villagers murmured. Eyes turned not toward the sisters, but toward Henry. They trusted them. The sisters brought food, warmth, smiles. Henry brought sermons, and now accusations without proof they could stomach. He saw it clearly. They didn't want to believe, not because they didn't see it, but because they did. To admit what the meat truly was would be to admit they'd eaten it. And once you know the taste of sin, you either cleanse yourself in truth or drown in denial. Henry walked away insolence, his cassock billowing in the breeze. Behind him, the feast resumed, more cautious, more quiet, but resumed nonetheless. That night, Henry sat in the chapel alone. The candlelight trembled. The journal sat in his lap. He whispered the names aloud, one by one. Amos, Hilda, Josiah, Baby G. Jacku. Each name felt heavier than the last. Outside, the smokehouse chimney glowed red against the stars, and far off in the woods, someone began to sing a soft, lilling lullaby. The same one Mabel always hummed when she stirred the stew. There are moments in a man's life when fate is not enough. By the third night after the feast, Father Henry had understood something terrible. New Orleans had made its choice. They would not rise. They would not accuse. The truth was too heavy, too ugly to hold. If he wanted justice, it would have to be delivered, not requested. He studied the sisters for 2 days. Where they walked, when they left, how they locked their doors. He memorized the path behind the smokehouse, where the old shed leaned like a dying thing. That's where they did it. Not inside the house, not in the chapel of hospitality they presented to the town, but in the back, behind the vines and wild roses, where screams could be swallowed by swamp fog and smoke. Henry made his decision as the sun set on a Sunday. He removed his collar, soiled his cassock, and dusted his boots. He would become what the sisters loved most, a stranger. At dusk, he walked down the Tobido Trail, head lowered, steps slow. When Mabel opened the front door, he did not raise his eyes. He simply said, "Evening." Lost the road near the river bend, wondering if you might have a spot for a man to rest. Mabel blinked once, then smiled. "Of course, poor thing," she said softly. "Come in. We never turn away a hungry soul." She gave him a seat near the hearth and poured him tea. Fragrant, sweet, just slightly cloudy. The kind of sweetness that coats the tongue too long. Henry knew what it was. Laudanum crushed valerian, maybe even belladonna. He stirred it, lifted it to his lips, then let it fall from his hand as if in sudden sleep. When his head hit the armrest, he closed his eyes, but only halfway. Through a sliver of vision, he watched the sisters. Yuli entered with a small, quiet smile. Her apron was folded over her arm. The blade glinted from beneath it. "He'll keep," she said. "Thin," Mabel murmured, "but the tongue's clean." Preachers' tongues are always sweet. The sisters moved toward him. They took his arms gently, almost like lovers preparing a body for a wedding, not a butchery. Henry remained limp, breathing shallow, every muscle cold with control. Then Uli leaned in and whispered, "It's better when they don't fight. The meat tells less story." That was the moment. Unra opened his eyes. He shoved both sisters back hard enough that Mabel hit the wall and crumpled. Before they could rise, he rushed from the parlor, kicked open the back door, and ran into the shed. Inside, the stench was worse than he imagined. It wasn't the scent of decay. It was clean, clinical, deliberate. Hooks lined the walls, buckets, tools, chains, a drain in the center of the floor, and in the far corner, a wooden chest stained dark and humming with flies. He didn't need to open it. Hess struck a match, dropped it onto the oil-soaked floorboards. The fire caught fast. The smokehouse ignited like dry bone. Within seconds, the shed was roaring with flame. Henri stood outside, his eyes burning, his skin hot, but head did not move. From inside the shed came screams. Not of animals, not of women, but of the many voices buried beneath years of smoke and silence. And rising above them, the wailing of the sisters, high and furious, echoing through the hollow. "You stole our flock. You stole our blood." Unra staggered back as the roof collapsed. Embers rose into the night sky, glowing like dying fireflies. The townspeople, alerted by the flames, came running, some with pails, some with pitchforks, others only with breathless horror. They stood and stared as the smokehouse burned itself clean. In the aftermath, nothing was said aloud. The next morning, no one asked questions. The Tobido home was scorched and empty. The sisters were not found. The sheriff recorded the event as an accidental fire caused by lightning. No investigation followed. But in hushed corners, people whispered what they saw. The tools, the screams, the stench, and though no graves were dug, the guilt was buried deep. Father Unruh left the town quietly 2 days later, his journal and Azing Bible packed in a cloth sack. Behind him, New Orleans began to rot slowly from the inside. But not all fire purifies. Some fires expose, and this one had revealed what no sermon ever could. The fire was supposed to be the end. But when the smoke cleared, New Orleans learned that some endings only reveal what should have never been hidden. By dawn, all that remained of the Tobido sisters' shed was a blackened rib cage of wood and ash. The smokehouse, once the pride of the town, collapsed into a pile of charred ruin, its chimney still coughing faint tendrils into the pale morning sky. And beneath it, beneath the floorboards, beneath the lies, the earth split open. The townspeople came slowly at first, a few at a time, the brave, the curious, the ones who still hoped, even now that Father Henry had been wrong. They gathered in a wide circle around the scorched foundation. No one spoke, and then someone gasped. A child's rib cage, scorched but intact, had risen from the softened ground like a relic reaching for air. Next to it, a femur the size of a grown man's forearm. A blackened skull, its jaw frozen open, and beside that, a ring, gold, dinted, and unmistakably engraved. Martha Livia fell to her knees. She reached into the ashes and lifted the ring with shaking fingers. "My brother," she whispered. "That's Jacob's ring. The one our father gave him when he turned 17. He went missing 13 years ago. They said he drowned." She looked up, her eyes wild. He hated the water. Others stepped forward, silent, pale. A man removed his hat and muttered, "We always said Billy was touched in the head, but I remember he knocked on their door once for a job. Never saw him again." A woman clutched her apron and whispered, "My aunt. She came visiting from Baton Rouge. Stayed with them 2 nights. Said the meat was so tender, she'd never tasted anything like it. Then she left, or so we thought." Another voice, "I found a shoe once in the creek behind their land. Still tied too small for a man." One by one, the town began to remember. Memories they'd buried, questions they'd silenced, gut feelings they dismissed as nonsense. But the fire had done what no preacher, no journal, no confrontation could accomplish. It unearthed the truth bone by bone. Father Unreal stood apart from them, his back to the chapel wall, watching it unfold. He didn't speak. He didn't move. This wasn't a sermon. This wasn't justice. It was grief, and it was collective. Soon the sheriff arrived, face ashen, hands trembling. He stumbled through the wreckage and said, too loudly, "Well, we'll sort through all this. Identify what we can. Give them a burial." But everyone knew there were too many bones, too many pieces, too many names forgotten. At one point, the gravediggers stopped counting, but not before reaching 30. In the center of it all, Henry saw something strange. A wooden box half burned but untouched by flame, unearthed by the heat. He stepped forward and knelt beside it. Inside were dozens of small trinkets, brooches, handkerchiefs, shoe buckles, rings, eyeglasses, items no one would miss individually, but together they told the story. Trophies, memorials, proof that the sisters had not just killed for survival, but kept pieces of their victims like tokens of devotion. Uli's delicate handwriting was carved into the lid. We remember them in flavor, not in name. Henry closed the box slowly and whispered, "Lord, forgive what no man can forget." By sunset, New Orleans was no longer the same. Children were kept indoors. Doors were double locked. Meals were barely touched. The smokehouse, once the heart of the town's gatherings, was now a scar on the earth, roped off with stakes and red twine. A town that once dined together in celebration, now whispered in fragments. She always hummed when she stirred the pot, didn't she? That tea, it always made me sleepy. How did we never wonder where the meat came from? The truth had burned through, and now it festered. Not because it was over, but because they had all tasted it, and no amount of prayer could cleanse the mouth of the dead. That night, Father Henry knelt alone before the altar. He lit 11 candles. He whispered 11 names aloud, some from the journal, some he knew from town, some who never made it into any book. And as the flame flickered, he whooped, not just for the dead, but for the silence that had let it happen. He whispered, "Their bones are not just beneath New Orleans. They are beneath our hearts." and we let them rot there. The wind picked up outside. A faint cry echoed from the woods. Not a ghost, just memory. But sometimes memory is louder than the grave. Some stories die with the fire, but not this one. The flames that consumed the Tobido smokehouse in the summer of 1884 may have devoured the flesh, the walls, and the secrets buried beneath the floor, but they did not destroy what lingered in the mouths of those who had feasted there. They did not burn away the shame. In the weeks that followed, New Orleans became a town of whispers. The laughter that once poured from porches during supper vanished. The clatter of spoons in bowls quieted. Even the dogs grew silent when the smokehouse ruins were near. And no matter what meat was served, venison, rabbit, duck, nothing tasted the same, because now everyone wondered. Father Unra stayed just long enough to preside over 11 burials. Simple wooden crosses planted in a field that was never blessed, only stared at from a distance. He kept no journal, gave no final sermon. When asked why he was leaving, he gave no answer. He simply walked down the hollow road into the mist, carrying only his Bible and a weight no man should carry. But Unra could not outrun the story. Wherever he went, Savannah, Baton Rouge, Mobile, people would eventually find him. Not because they knew his name, but because of what they felt around him, a presence, an unease that hung in the air like woodsome smoke long after the fire. In every town, it was the same. He would rent a small room at the edge of town. He'd stay only a few nights, and always someone dreamed that tea began with a scent of smoked meat, rich, familiar, nauseating. Then the dreams turned darker. A child's voice, a set of small teeth in the palm, a cellar door that wouldn't stay shut. More than once, a boarding house owner would bang on Unra's door in the dead of night. You were screaming, they'd say, begging, saying names we didn't know. But Father Henry would not explain. He would just lower his eyes, offer thanks, and leave by morning. Soon, towns began to speak in lowered tones. There's a priest who travels alone. They say he's cursed. He doesn't age much. Don't eat if he blesses your table. The food tastes familiar. Meanwhile, New Orleans withered. The vines overtook the road. The chapel closed. The smokehouse ruins were fenced off, but no one dared touch them. The sheriff moved away. The market went dry. And the last child born in the town cried for a week and never opened his eyes. Eventually, the map makers stopped including it altogether. But those who once lived there remembered, and they carried that memory like a second tongue, one that twitched whenever meat hit the pan, one that recoiled when smoke rose too thick. In private, many confessed to Father Unra in the years to come. I liked it, one man whispered, drunk and ashamed. I didn't know, but I liked it. Another, I still dream of her Yulid, she's holding a plate and smiling. And perhaps worst of all, sometimes I miss the taste. In the final years of his life, Father Henry returned only once to Toth Hollow. He walked through weeds that came to his chest. He found the 11 crosses weathered and rotted. He lit a candle, set it in the earth, and spoke only 4 words. May you be forgotten. But as he turned to leave, he heard it. Not a voice, not a ghost, just the wind through trees, and in it a faint humming, like a woman stirring stew. They say that even now if you stand where the Tobido smokehouse once stood, and the mist is low and the moon is pale, you'll hear it, too. The humming, the whisper of knives, the sound of chewing. Some even claim they've seen 2 figures in the fog, one tall, one stooped, moving through the trees with baskets in their arms. And others swear that in nearby towns, meat sometimes goes missing from butcher stalls, and someone always buys smokewood. The story of New Orleans was never written in books. It's not taught in schools or carved into any stone, but it lives in whispers, in rumors, and in the mouths of those who ate too eagerly, who praised the tenderness before questioning the source. The sisters are gone, but the taste never.